Welcome to CSIS Online. The way we bring you events is changing, but we'll still present live analysis and award-winning digital media from our Dracopolis Ideas Lab, all on your time, live or on demand. This is CSIS Online.
The purpose of this conversation today is to bring to all of you a discussion of three remarkable individuals that do something that we all benefit from and none of us knows anything about. This is a bit what life is like, that there are these crucial people that do things. We all are the beneficiaries of it. And we're going to explore that today. And it's under the title of technology transfer. Okay, that sounds pretty ominous, but it is actually a crucial function. Our partner today is AUTM, A-U-T-M. It used to be an acronym that stood for something, but today it's just AUTM because it's an international organization that represents professionals like these three individuals who help bring the ideas in industry, in universities, these ideas from creative minds in universities, and make them available as products that benefit all our lives. I'm going to turn to Mark Saddam. Mark was the president of AUTM until I think last year, Mark. But I asked Mark to just give us an overview of AUTM so that we all can kind of get a common grounding. Mark, let me turn to you.
Great. Thanks, John. It's good to be here, everybody. So I'm going to share my screen very briefly and give you a very quick overview of AUTM. We used to be known as the Association of University Technology Managers, but we don't deal with just universities and we don't deal with just technology anymore. So we switched it just to AUTM. So I was the chair of AUTM up until March, where I passed the baton to Laura Savatsky from Versity, the blood research that used to be the Blood Research Center of Wisconsin. So simply put, AUTM is a global association that helps manage the ideas that come from early stage innovation. So tech transfer, which I'll define in just a second, AUTM itself does a lot of education, promoting, and making sure that the people that do this job of technology transfer are well trained and know the basics of the profession. And our objective is to just get ideas out into the world. AUTM itself is global, though most of our membership resides in the United States, but we have about 3,000 members all over the world with researchers, businesses, universities, not-for-profit research centers, all sharing the ideal of getting innovations from bench to market. The mission of AUTM itself is to support and advance tech transfer worldwide with the objective of advancing discoveries for a better world. Again, we are the people that help translate an idea from the earliest stage of innovation and find partners or start companies that bring those ideas out to market. So what is this thing called tech transfer? It has different definitions depending on your context, but for today, we're talking about academic and nonprofit research centers tech transfer. So universities, as you well know, do a lot of early stage research, some $60 billion a year from the federal government alone. And those generate really great ideas, but you need people who know how to evaluate early stage ideas and find the public-private partnership that best fits that idea to bring it out to market. So examples of technologies that have participated in the tech transfer process can be as varied as the Google algorithm that came out of Stanford University, the Honeycrisp apple. So tech transfer can be delicious. My university, the University of New Hampshire, does a lot of work with pumpkins, so you can thank us for your pumpkin pie on Thanksgiving. Life-saving vaccinations, the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines both had a legacy in early stage university research, so we're all living the value of tech transfer right now. But having those ideas isn't enough. There are many great ideas that lay on the sides of science because they can't find their way out into a path to market. So we help to keep bringing those discoveries to the market itself and figure out how the ideas fit and where they best go. So the last thing I'll share here is what this looks like from the inside of a university and public sector research. You have the part that I think everybody understands, R&D. Everybody loves R&D. That's where we spend a lot of money, but that gets to the creation of knowledge. And then where does that knowledge go? It can create an invention, an innovation, however you want to call it that. A patent is maybe the easiest thing to think about. In tech transfer, then those ideas are evaluated. We're professionals like Kelly and I who work in tech transfer, who will look at an idea and say, I think this has merit. I think the science looks good. The business opportunity looks good. And sometimes, most importantly, I think we know what to do with it, because there are some really early ideas sometimes that you're just not sure where it goes. So that's part of the evaluation. Then we are responsible for protecting that intellectual property in the right, in the way that most suits the idea. Then oftentimes the same person, or at least the same staff, then goes out and markets that to large and small companies of all kinds. And occasionally we start our own companies to commercialize it because maybe the idea is platform technology, or the path is too wide. But in the end, everything turns into a license. And so if you could distill tech transfer down into a single concept, it would be, we are licensing the rights from innovation to the people we believe will eventually deliver those ideas to market. That idea then goes into either the startup or the licensee to have money invested and have that product be developed. And those products, when they hit the market, generate economic growth, but also societal benefit, which is the most important thing to all of us. And that societal benefit then creates value and economic growth, which then allows more investment into research and development, and the cycle starts over. So that's a fairly simplistic view of technology transfer. And I'll skip through these really quickly to get to the discussion. So we talked about vaccines, great ways to get ideas out. And then I think where we'll take the jump off point here, John, and I'll throw it back to you, is what we're going to talk about today is this idea that has been championed by Autumn that we're calling FASTER, the focused action to support technology and economic response. And the idea is that unlike the rest of the world, the US is one of the only, if not the only, developed economy that does not fund technology transfer directly. We jokingly inside the field call it the great unfunded mandate, meaning we all have to do it, but there actually isn't any money to do it. The university's commitment to technology transfer can vary widely. Their success can vary widely. And when we think about ways to make the economy better, we think about the inclusivity of technology transfer and the ability for our profession to make an economic impact in every community that has a university and a nonprofit research center in their backyards. The great places of the country that we all aspire to be, your Silicon Valleys and research triangles and Bostons, they are who they are because there's great research universities at their core, and the ideas are spinning out and creating that economic opportunity. So FASTER was designed to propose to directly invest in tech transfer, to add a centralized support for smaller schools in terms of regional infrastructure for each state. And then most importantly, an additional investment for HBCUs and MSIs so that we can help create a more wind at the back of those institutions to make sure that tech transfer is inclusive of all communities in the United States. So John, I'm going to take that down. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we can get to the discussion.
Mark, you've done a brilliant job of opening this up, and you've really, in many ways, answered all the questions that I had planned to ask. But I do think that a lot of this was very new for our viewers, and so I'd like to just unpack it just a little bit. Let me ask you, Mark. Let's go back. I think it was 40 years ago that Congress passed what's now called the BiDol Act. The purpose of that was to get research that's been funded by the federal government into the private sector. Would you just reflect on the BiDol Act and the foundation that it makes for us as a country in supporting tech transfer?
Yes, so BiDol is often called the founding of tech transfer, although the first tech transfer office was the University of Wisconsin back in the 1930s, which was the creation of vitamin D, additional vitamin D to milk. So back the very first transactions from universities were helping human health. BiDol came about because there's a recognition that the process to bring ideas to market was inefficient. And some of the inefficiencies are related to the fact that prior to BiDol, the federal government itself owned the inventions, and it was challenging at best to access those. So the data that we talk about a lot is that in 1979, which is the year prior to BiDol, that there were over 28,000 patents that were owned by the US government, and under 2% of those were licensed, and that there hadn't been a single healthcare innovation, a therapeutic, that had come out of a federally licensed technology ever. Now, post-BiDol, a law that was called by The Economist at one point one of the most enlightened pieces of legislation in the past 50 years of the United States. I think that article came out in 2008 or 2009. There are hundreds of products, hundreds of therapeutics, thousands of innovations, and tens of thousands of startup companies around university technology. So it's a rare example of a law that you can look at the before and after and see that it actually made a fundamental difference.
Oh, great. Thank you, Mark. Let me turn to you, Kelly Sexton. You run one of the most significant technology transfer organizations in the country at the University of Michigan. How does, and Mark said, you can't, the federal government won't pay for this. How do you do it? How do you support this?
Yeah, so at U of M, we view this as a core part of our research infrastructure. You mentioned kind of the size of University of Michigan's research enterprise. We have about $1.6 billion in research expenditures on our campus each year. And so because of that, we have a big infrastructure in place to support research, and tech transfer is considered a core component of that. I think you see that reflected in the FASTER proposal, the recognition that the larger universities typically already have a tech transfer infrastructure in place. There's more we could do. We could certainly transfer more innovations and technologies out into the world with more infrastructure support. But if you're at a large research university with more than $500 million in research activity, you're typically already funding this activity as just something you're doing to support faculty and to create economic opportunity in the region surrounding the university.
Great, thank you. Let me turn to you, Dr. Womack. Chad Womack, you started off as a research scientist. You a life scientist in your own right. You worked with Tony Fauci out at NIH, but now you are working with the historically Black colleges and universities on entrepreneurship. This is a community that historically has not been a big voice, even though there have been some very prominent researchers. How does technology transfer fit into your strategy for the HBCUs?
Yeah, it's a great question, John, and thank you for the opportunity to participate in this great conversation. It is a very important part of the strategy to help HBCUs accelerate and articulate their value proposition for the tech industry as a whole, recognizing, of course, that historically Black colleges and universities are not all one monolithic group. There are a variety of different types of HBCUs, including the HBCU medical schools, Howard College of Medicine, Morehouse School of Medicine, which is one of my alma maters as well, Meharry College of Medicine. And then, of course, you have graduate programs, and you have schools like public and land-grant HBCUs like North Carolina A&T, Florida A&M, Morgan State, Prairie View, and others that have excellent research programs, faculty conducting research as well. So it's critical that our HBCUs be involved in the tech transfer process that Mark Seedham just described. Part of the challenges that they have is that it's very expensive to maintain and manage a tech transfer office. And it's also very important that the research itself be supported at a sufficient level to create the flow of capital and intellectual property that's needed to sustain a research enterprise on the campuses. So we're doing a variety of things at the UNCF, and with our partners, including other organizations, to foster and enhance the research profile of our HBCUs, but also to connect them to industry. And I want to say a special thank you to Mark Seedham and his colleagues at Autumn, who have been excellent in providing support. And we're looking forward to working with Autumn in the future to support tech transfer activities across HBCUs.
Thank you, Chad. Let me, obviously for our viewers today, and I think many of them probably have a background in technology transfer, but we're recording this and we intend to make it widely available to, staff and up in Capitol Hill, et cetera. So we need to educate them about what do you guys really do? So Mark and Kelly, tell us what you do in a technology transfer office. I assume that you are mentoring faculty that have a brilliant idea about how to turn this into a product, or how to reach out to industry to try to attract them to your ideas. Maybe you are working to connect with venture capital firms that are willing to fund exciting new ideas. Share with us, Kelly, let's start with you and then Mark. Share with us what do you do every day in your office?
Great. Thank you, John. And I think Mark did a great job with the overview as well. So we're about a 45-person team, and we get involved at the very earliest stage with our faculty. So it's often a conversation with a faculty member and her graduate student and a great idea that might change the world. And so we work with them to file the patents to protect that idea. And we work to try to find funding, translational research funding, so that they can build out that first prototype, so that they can, go through some go, no-go decision experiments, some really critical experiments. We connect them with companies to try to, find a partnership opportunity to maybe sponsor some additional research and also license the technology. Like you said, we're also connecting them with mentors. And I love that word, mentorship. We actually have a program in our office called our Mentor in Residence program. And it's where we bring people with industry backgrounds, entrepreneurial backgrounds, to mentor these teams for weeks, months, and sometimes for years, as we go from research discovery to something we can help them take out into the world. We connect them with entrepreneurs with the hope that we can find an entrepreneur that can take that technology and create it and grow it into a business. We connect them with investors. We maintain active relationships with hundreds of investors around the country to make them aware of the startup companies coming out of the University of Michigan. So kind of all of those things you described are part of what we're doing every single day.
Mark, anything to add? Because Kelly gave us a great overview of that, but your thoughts?
I do, and I'm going to intentionally switch my background here, if it lets me, for a specific reason. So I work at the University of New Hampshire, and the reason why I wanted to do that is the job at smaller universities is fundamentally different than at larger universities. So I used to work at UNC Chapel Hill back in the day. And when I came to UNH, what Kelly said is exactly correct. And she probably spends more than her staff probably spends more than half of their time on the connecting and licensing and venture and startup, where I spend 90% of my time just getting our faculty to understand the process, to understand why it's relevant to them and their scholarship. And it actually is the reason why the FASTER idea came to pass, was the recognition that at the less resourced universities, which is 90% of all universities, do not have a significant tech transfer function. The work is it's earlier, and it takes a lot to get started. And what we wanted to try to do was not have a university get lucky and have a good transaction that opened up their administration to say, hey, this tech transfer thing, we should probably spend a little more energy on it, but rather to give everybody the same start so that everybody can invest in that founding capacity so that they can get good at the job. So when the opportunity hits, they can do it. So I would say 10% of my job at UNH is the same job I did at UNC Chapel Hill. No better or worse, it's just the issues at that 120 and below, 120 million and below. They're just more fundamental, and it's less well established as something that the university should do, because obviously there haven't been a lot of successes in most of those schools, and that's what we're trying to help with.
That's a great transition, Mark, to this next dimension that I'd like to explore in this conversation. What we really need more than anything in this country is to have a much wider, broader base of innovation, so that exciting developments are not just found in the few half a dozen innovation centers, the Stanford and in San Francisco or Boston or New York, but it's broadly throughout the country. And what you're describing is really the purpose of FASTER. So let's turn to FASTER. I mean, again, FASTER is designed to provide the infrastructure support for colleges and universities around the country, to build this technology transfer infrastructure. So, Mark, let me start with you. All three of you worked on this, but what would FASTER do if it were enacted?
Yeah. So at the core, it's actually providing the startup capital for universities to start getting good at tech transfer. The role of Autumn is we are the trainers and educators of the profession. So we don't have to worry so much about how do these new offices get trained and educated, and how do we know that they get good at what they do, because ours is a very welcoming profession. Autumn is, it's a very collegial group of folks. Everybody is helping each other, but you have to have the job in order to get in and get trained. So at the core, what we feel like is, if you listen to the narrative in DC and around the country, it's more economic opportunity for more places, more diverse opportunities. And then you'll hear, we need to get better at early stage innovation. Well, if you don't fund it, how can you get better at it? Because there's actually, in most cases, no one there to do the job. So that is at the core what this is all about, is let's have every university that has any research function whatsoever, or even a significant scholarship function, let's get them a professional, at least an FTE in tech transfer. Let's double down on that at the MSIs and HBCUs to give them a faster start, no pun intended. And then let's build up this innovation capacity, because again, there are 7,500 universities or something like that around the country, 900 major research universities. There is some in every state and in every corner of every state. And that's a built-in network for us to connect together.
So Kelly, let me ask, I mean, what difference would this make? Why would this be important to average citizens, that FASTER is there to help universities commercialize their intellectual ideas, their product?
Yeah, John. Well, first, I appreciated your comment about how we have a handful of hotbeds where great innovation is coming out. So at U of M, one of the reasons I love working at U of M, and I think, our team largely agrees, we're this huge research engine, but we're not located in one of those entrepreneurial hotbeds. So I feel like this gives us both an opportunity and an obligation to experiment with models that can be translated to other areas of the country that aren't in the Bay Area or New York or Boston. And there is no reason that we can't have incredible innovation, entrepreneurial ecosystems anchored by amazing universities all around our country. I think we're at a really exciting point where, our nation's leaders realize we've lost our innovation edge. We're losing it to other countries. It's time for a generational reinvestment in research and innovation at universities and research institutions around the country. And so now you need to pair that with this infrastructure to ensure that these great discoveries and innovations are moved out into the world to broad deployment. So what would it look like to a citizen? It would look like more economic opportunity. It would look like more jobs available for you. It would look like, having that shot that your child will have to, when they graduate, won't have to leave the home state to move to the coast to have a rewarding and lucrative career and have a shot at having more economic security and opportunity than the generation before them.
There were 4 planks in Abraham Lincoln's platform when he ran for president, and one of them was broadening education in America. It was the whole push for the land grant schools, and what became a big push for everybody. Dr. Womack, the HBCUs have always had to struggle to find their space, their way up in this environment. I know there are maybe 3 or 4 of the HBCUs that have tech transfer offices, but it's not something widely available to HBCUs. How would FASTER help the HBCUs?
Well, I think it would be a tremendous help. The devil's always in the details, and the angels are always in the results. So I think we need to.
I love that.
With the hope that whatever survives the sausage making of the legislative process, that it does channel and promote the notion that we have to support our institutions in terms of building capacity. As I said before, it's an expensive proposition to maintain and manage a tech transfer office, particularly if you're additionally challenged with being behind the 8 ball, so to speak, with regards to research funding. Those 2 things have to work in tandem. And so what we've seen, and this has been published in Science and in other high-level scientific journals, that African-American investigators and institutions are not treated as fairly with regards to research funding by NIH and other federal agencies. So part of what we hope will happen is that we level the playing field. But I would also hope that we would use this as an opportunity to leapfrog, not just move incrementally, but let's move exponentially towards a much more robust research enterprise that's producing high levels of intellectual property that has commercial potential, and then simultaneously hone and sharpen our commercialization capacities across different HBCUs. And lastly, part of what I'm hoping we can do in working with other higher ed institutions that are research intensive is figure out a way to build research consortium that allow us to leverage the intellectual capital and therefore property that's being that will be generated across several campuses and not just one. So,
Mark, this would be a time for me to ask you to bring up that last slide that you had. If you can do that, could you share with us again this? Okay, so now just talk us through this chart, what it's telling us. I think it's really important.
Sure, I had to find the mute button when I shared the screen. Yeah, so the principles of that we came together, we really spend a lot of time thinking about what's going to make a difference, and actually how do universities get held accountable to the work that they do. So what we looked at this was, it's kind of a bell curve, and the folks that worked on this with Kelly and I recognize that top level university, the ones that have $500 million or more, there are quite a few of them, and they're already investing it. But the reality is, those schools can still always do more. There is, I've never heard of a tech transfer office that says we are suitably funded to do the work that we do. If you had $1 billion a year or $1.6 billion, like Kelly does, you're never going to get every single opportunity. You can't. So even that incremental value will be put to good use. But we view the sweet spot as the middle tier institutions, that 50 to 100 million and 100 to 500 million, where there is some heft of research, like like Chad spoke about, is there's real grist for the mill, so to speak, but probably tech transfer is underfunded because you just kind of can't get over the top of that to invest, because there's always something else to invest in. And tech transfer often comes last because it's speculative. We're taking ideas and saying, we think this will work, but we're going to be wrong a lot. And so it's easier to invest in a scholarship or into a need that you can draw a direct line to. But we wanted to make sure everybody else got something too. So you see the investments, 50 million down to even below 10 million, saying you have research, and this would get effectively an FTE and some IP support for those institutions too, so that everybody can have an employee who's focused on it. Now, the key is that we put in the proposal that we're hoping people pick up, that the universities and I want to make sure I mention, research hospitals is a big chunk of this too. It's not all universities, public sector, rest of public sector research. They're not allowed to reduce their existing funding during the time that this money comes in. So you can't just displace it and say, great, well, the federal government is going to pay for it and we don't have to. It's, if you want the money, you have to continue your current level of support at minimum through the period of the proposal. And that makes sure that that money is an accelerant and not just displacing something else. And then lastly was, again, the doubling down for the HBCUs and MSIs in recognition that there is some catching up to do in many of those places, but also, being able to provide a little extra funding to get a little quicker start to make sure that we're seeing successes in those places as well. I'm trying to figure out how to go back. Sorry, I gotta start over, I hit the button. The other two pieces are, again, each state would have $1 million a year to have a convening center. So even if it was a small school, maybe it's a non-research intensive university, but they have a great idea, because great ideas are democratized. A great idea can come from anywhere. And so these areas are going to be supported. So a school like I'll just give an example of a school in New Hampshire, Riviera University, which doesn't do research, maybe they have a great idea for an app that can transform human health. We don't know, and we should not exclude those organizations either. And then last, which is really important to us, especially at Autumn, is that the universities that receive the funding report all of their activities, because much like the current funding of tech transfer is optional for universities, if we're being honest, the reporting of its outputs is also optional. Because there is no funding, there is no one who can require you to report your outputs. So Autumn has played this critical convening role over 40 years in collecting data, but it's voluntary. And as Kelly can, I'm sure, tell you, the voluntary reporting of data is nobody's happy about it, but we do it because we know we want society to know what we're up to. But there are hundreds of universities that do not report the outputs of their work with federal research. And this would you get money, and then you're going to have to report the outputs. So NIST and the federal government could actually see the full comprehensive view of what their investment in research actually delivers.
So there's an audit trail here for anybody in the Congress that's worried, is this just throwing money away at something? No, there's an audit trail that's built into faster legislation.
Yes. Yes. The one thing that I'd like to add, John, just really quickly, is you hear a lot about we have to get better at this, we have to get better at this. And I mentioned it earlier, is we do, but you have to fund it too. You wouldn't expect a grocery store to expand your options, but not actually invest in new ideas and new products and new technologies. So this is really very fundamental.
Okay, so I used to be the chief financial officer for the Department of Defense. And so I look at big numbers, and here are the big number here on this chart, $380 million. That's the equivalent of 3 F-35 aircraft, 3. It's the equivalent of 1/3 of a destroyer. When you think about what we can do for the country for that little investment, I mean, it is an enormous opportunity for us as a country. I just want to highlight that. Okay, I feel better. I got that out of my system. So if I could just ask, let me, Mark, and all three of you really, what are the prospects for getting FASTER enacted this year?
Kelly, you want me to start, or do you want to start?
Mark, please start.
Okay. So, we were talking just before this, John. I called myself a naive optimist, which I am. the idea has gotten some attention in the Senate and in the House because it actually addresses the problem that everybody wants. So there were versions of Endless Frontier, which is actually what prompted us to kind of workshop how you could really deliver what some of these programs say they want to deliver. There was a version of it where a piece of this was actually in the legislation, but like Chad said, in the sausage making, it's not currently in the legislation as written, but we hold out some hope. So, I would say the odds in the moment are probably, sub 20% of being included, but it seems to have created an echo among the people we're talking about, is that I think folks recognize it is a good idea and a valid idea that can help. But in the creation of legislation, there are lots of great ideas that wind up on the cutting room floor. And as you've talked to us about, it's even if it winds up in something like an Endless Frontier, it still has to be resourced. So just being in the legislation is not enough. It has to be resourced. But I agree with you fundamentally that I know in our daily lives, $385 million is quite a bit of money. But in the grand scheme of federal research and the federal investment in science, it is not much to create transformative results, because the Autumn does a survey with Bio, and we've had 20 years of data, and that Autumn Bio report, which is not just life sciences, it's all technologies, says that the return to society on technology transfer is nearly $1 trillion in gross domestic output. And that's just over 20 years when none of this was funded. So we think there's a lot of upside for society to investing a little bit in research infrastructure, as you said.
Yeah, I'd use a very homespun analogy. One of my hobbies is making bread. I only put in 2 teaspoons of yeast, but that's what makes it a loaf. It's just a little bit, but it leavens everything. It's really powerful. We have questions from our audience. Let me turn in. We've got about 8 or 9 minutes left here. The first question: how does tech transfer offices, how do they work with the SBIR, STTR programs?
I'm happy to mention that one. We love the SBIR, STTR programs, America's Innovation Fund. I think they're great. The way we typically interact with them is that the early stage startup companies that we're forming, that is often one of their first sources of funding. They're great programs. It's non-dilutive grant funding that these deep tech companies can use. Phase 1 is often $175,000 to $225,000. Phase 2 grants from SBIR and STTR can be quite significant. So we encourage our startups to go after them. We're often, reviewing and looking at their proposals to help them get ready for submission. Universities work closely with their SBDC, Small Business Development Corporations, in their state to help their local companies go after the source of funding.
Any other comments here? Let me turn to the second question then, if I may. Thank you very much, Kelly. As FASTER is structured, would there be any restrictions on the funds that are granted to a qualifying university? Is it allowed to cover salaries, proposal writing? How is FASTER envisioned, and are there any internal guidelines or restrictions that people should know about?
Yeah, I'll take that briefly. So the answer is there's one restriction that we intended to put on this, which is that it can't be used to create an investment fund, because just feel like that's the private enterprise does that would not be a reasonable place to go, but could be used for things like translational research funds to de-risk a technology prior to licensing. Otherwise, we wanted the universities to decide how they could invest in it, so they could invest in all of these things. But the key limitation of that was that the funding would be directed towards the organization and the institution that is responsible for reporting subject inventions to the federal government. So what we don't want is to have it go generically through the university to write a grant, because grant writing is not commercialization. We wanted it to go to the office, which the classic tech transfer offices, that would then be able to say, this is the area in our local ecosystem that needs the greatest amount of money. Effectively, we wanted the resources in the hands of the professionals that know what to do, because like all large organizations, it can be picked apart and not wind up having the focused intent that we wanted it to have.
I've spent far too much time with my questions because we're now really toward the end. So I do want to just to frame an observation and then to ask for you, each of you, to reflect on it. And that is the way that the American economy is evolving. We've got about 3,000 counties in America. You know, a county, the smallest sovereign structure that we have in our government, 3,000 counties. Only 500 of those counties contribute 70% of GDP. 2,500 counties contribute only 30% of GDP. We're not going to be able to hold America together if we have a widening gap of opportunity where people are being left behind. And so let me just ask each of you to reflect on how important this is now for America's future. Chad, let me start with you.
Well, first, thank you for giving me the opportunity to comment on that great question. Clearly, if our country's full promise, economic promise, is to be realized, we're going to have to adopt an all boats rising approach, where everyone, regardless of geography, race, class, gender, etc., have an opportunity to participate in the great American experiment. And I think entrepreneurship, commercialization, tech transfer are all components of our unique economic ecosystem that allows us to translate ideas into commercial ventures. I think we do that better than anyone else. And it's an extraordinary opportunity to lift all boats, regardless of where you are from a geographical standpoint. So my hope is that we can, through legislation, but also through partnerships with industry and higher ed, and also engaging community that surround our universities and colleges with the opportunities to participate and learn how to translate ideas and inventions and innovations into commercializable products and services.
Thank you, Chad. Kelly, let me turn to you.
Yeah, great answer, Chad. I think that's a wonderful way to frame it. It's almost in some ways existential for the country. So I think of it in two phases. I mean, one, we know that we have incredible innovation that's occurring in pockets all across the country, not just in those, handful of counties that are, benefiting and creating the biggest economic contributions to the country. So how do we give those innovations the opportunity to be the basis for incredible startup companies and be the basis for economic generators in their county? And I think that investment in FASTER is a piece to get us there. The second piece is, how do we create more juggernauts of innovation around the country? There's no reason we can't vastly increase the number of incredible research institutions, universities, well-funded HBCUs around the country to be the anchors and the economic engines for their regions. I think we have an opportunity to think about the economy we want to have. And it's important that, parents aren't afraid to send their kids to college because they know that for economic opportunity when they graduate, they're going to leave the state. We need to grow the economies that surround these institutions.
And Mark.
Yeah, I wish I could say it as eloquently as Chad said. I want to triple down on what he said, because that's really what it's all about. And in some ways, I often describe tech transfer as managing serendipity, and that it's not random. You need to have a skill set in order to know when good opportunity goes. And if we're gonna activate those 2,500 counties that are that have tremendous potential but aren't showcasing their potential, you have to have a little education and a little training. Going back to your comment about the Moral Act and Abe Lincoln, right? That was all about educating farmers about how to be more efficient and kind of grow their version of the economy through, kind of reconstruction. This is just a modern version of that. It's a reinvestment in the understanding of technology and the core role that technology can come from anywhere. But it has to be inclusive and it has to be representative of the country itself. If everyone doesn't get to participate, we're just reinforcing the status quo, which is what we'd all really love to see change.
I spent 10 years personally working on Capitol Hill and spent another 15 years working every day around the Congress. This is one of the best ideas I have seen in many years. This is a tangible, concrete idea that can make a difference. And I know I'm being a little emotional to say it, but if we're going to hold this country together and bring opportunity into the heartland of America, that 70% that's only contributing 30% of GDP, this is a solution. This is a unique opportunity. It's yeast in dough. It's salt in soup. A little bit is going to make an enormous difference. And I'm really grateful that all of you are leading on this. So let me wrap it up. We've gone slightly over our time. I just want to say thank you for the three of you. Thank you to Autumn, a great organization. It's an acronym that more people should know about, and it's an organization more people should champion. So let me say thank you to all of you for being with us today, and our audience. Thank you. And many other people are going to see this because we look forward to posting it and putting it widely available for the country. Thank you all.
Thanks for the chance, John.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, John.
See you now.